The Minnesota Vikings bandwagon continues to get fuller and fuller and fuller as they win 4 straight games and 3 straight games versus teams that are considered to be Super Bowl favorites. The Texans, the Niners, the Packers, all of these teams were on the short list of NFL analysts and their predictions to make it to the Super Bowl and perhaps even win the Super Bowl. But the national media is now recognizing the Minnesota Vikings, from Stephen A. Smith to Tim Hasselbeck to Scott Van Pelt. And now we've got other national media sports talk show hosts recognizing the Minnesota Vikings as well. Colin Cowherd, who has been a big fan of Sam Darnold all throughout his career, talked about how good he would be coming out of the draft. He's just kind of been his guy, even though he struggled with the Jets and the Panthers. He just always believed that he would be able to figure it out somewhere. Yeah, when he signed to the Minnesota Vikings, he was all about Sam Darnold. Well, he went on his show, The Herd, the other day and talked about the Minnesota Vikings' success with Sam Darnold.
His weaknesses have been coached out, and all of his strengths have been coached up. And there's a lot of flukes in this league. Steeler fans get mad when you don't embrace them. You're just not good enough at quarterback. You're not good enough offensively as a culture. Yeah, the Saints are being exposed. In the end, they're just not good enough. It's a head coach quarterback league. But Sam Darnold always had talent. And when Kevin O'Connell got this job, he was called the tall Sean McVay. And you know what I think about Brian Flores, who was kind of rough on Tua, but he absolutely knows what he's doing. So staff, quarterback, weapons, I buy it. I don't think it's a fluke. I think maybe it's fate. Maybe Sam Darnold always needed a coach like this. You start looking at their schedule. Boy, that Jets loss to Denver looms large, because now you go to London. Maybe that's the best place for the Jets to get out of the country. So the Jets go over to London, and again, just look at these offensive outputs. It's really impressive. But the defense has been, because they don't have a very layered Pro Bowl list of guys defensively, but Brock Purdy said, I've never seen anything like it. C.J. Stroud, totally flummoxed. For Matt LaFleur, one of the best first-half coaches in the league, they were just outsmarted. I don't even know what I watched. It was crazy. And then, you look at their schedule for the Vikings. Again, they've got momentum. Jets don't. Then it's a bye, and you get Minnesota at home. Rams beat up. Is Anthony Richardson healthy? Jaguars are a mess. Titans. You get to a point here, J-Mac, even if they have a loss in there, you're looking at an 8-1 football team. I buy them.
There are multiple tests that you need to pass in an NFL season to get past this fluky stage. The first test is week 1 and 2. There's a lot of teams that start off a season 1-0, like the New England Patriots starting the season 1-0 after they defeated the Cincinnati Bengals. You looked at the Patriots and were like, okay, that was a lucky win. The Patriots are not a legit football team, and now they've rattled off 3 straight losses, and their season's already in the tank. You look at a team like the Saints. They started out 2-0, put up 45 points against the Cowboys. I think put up 45 points in their week 1 matchup too. And it's like you look at the Saints and say, okay, that's not going to be something that you can continue. The Minnesota Vikings have made it past that first stage. They're past that, okay, you won 1 lucky game, you won 2 lucky games. Let's see how for real you are in week 3 and week 4. They're 4-0. So they made it past that first stage of flukiness. But now here's the next stage of flukiness. You need to get past this mid-season stage of flukiness, because there are teams like last year's Philadelphia Eagles that started off really hot. They were 10-1, and everyone had them as their Super Bowl favorite, their Super Bowl prediction. Jalen Hurts to A.J. Brown to Devontae. Devontae Smith, one of their elite wide receivers. They just had everything rolling. Their defense was elite. Everything was just going good for the Eagles. And then they fell off the face of the earth, lost 5 of their last 6 games, and nobody really had them to beat the Buccaneers in the playoffs, and the Buccaneers wiped the floor with them. That's the second stage. The Minnesota Vikings are hot right now, but it was September. Some people are calling it Samtember after Sam Darnold's incredible month of leading the NFL in touchdown passes. Now the Vikings enter that second stage. Can they continue through this second and third tier of the NFL regular season where they are considered legit Super Bowl contenders? Because this is the question that they need to answer. Can Sam Darnold do this throughout the entire regular season and not just a 4-game span? Because that's ultimately going to be what decides the Minnesota Vikings season. And you know that as quickly as the national media has jumped on the Minnesota Vikings, they are going to jump off just as fast if the Minnesota Vikings lose 1 or 2 games. They got the Jaguars, they got the Titans, they got the Cardinals, they got some easier matchups coming up midseason. And if they lose a few of these games, you know the national media is going to go on an outrage and talk about how they never believed in the Minnesota Vikings to begin with. So this is a very important step for the Vikings because teams can get hot early on in the season. But how many teams that are hot early on in the season win that Super Bowl at the end of the year? I would rather be hot at the end of the season. You think about the Giants twice against those Patriots teams. Didn't even look like they were going to make the playoffs. Well, they win like 4 straight to finish out the regular season. They carry it off into the playoffs, and they win it all. Eagles, I used that example last year. Started off the season hot, fell off at the end of the year. So there is so much awesomeness. I don't know if that's a word, but so much glory right now that the Minnesota Vikings are receiving, and it's fair. And everyone's answering, are they a fluke? Are they not? And everyone seems to be on the side of they're not a fluke. But you need to continue to prove it throughout the regular season because they've made it past the first stage. But now you've got to continue it. You got to stay healthy. They've been really fortunate. I get that they didn't have Addison for a couple of games. They didn't have Hawkinson for a couple of games. But they basically have their entire defense intact. Ivan Pace Jr. missed a game, but their entire defense has been so elite this year, that's been so good at forcing turnovers, they basically have had their entire defense without missing a single player. So it's going to be an interesting season to continue to follow because as the schedule gets easier, you would think that the wins would continue to come, but that's not exactly how it works. The Minnesota Vikings have done an amazing job of putting together turnovers with offensive points, meaning Jordan Love, we turned him over twice in our own territory. So you think about that, that's easy points for the Minnesota Vikings offense. They did the same thing to Brock Purdy. They did the same thing to Daniel Jones. The Vikings defense has been so good at getting turnovers in the other team's territory that it's led to easy points offensively. So will that continue through the second and third stages of this NFL season? We'll have to see, but I have my doubts. But it's fun to see the national media jumping on the Minnesota Vikings. And another guy from the show called The Facility, another Fox Sports 1 show, talked about the Minnesota Vikings as well.
Regardless of how good you think the Vikings are, they're better. Find a coaching staff outside of the Chiefs that you think is better than the combination of Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores. Get this. They're first in passing touchdowns and they are first in interceptions. They're a top 5 scoring offense and simultaneously a top 5 scoring defense. They lead the National Football League in sacks. Not only is Brian Flores a wizard, but his players are playing at a masterful level. C.J. Stroud, down and out. Brock Purdy, down and out. Jordan Love, down and out. Do y'all realize that the Vikings are dismantling some of the best quarterbacks in football? The Vikings are dismantling some of the best offenses in football. The Vikings are dismantling some of the best teams in football. I will say it one final time. Offenses beware. Teams beware. Because the Vikings, they not playing no games.
He said it. The Vikings are number 1 in interceptions, number 1 in sacks, and the Vikings defense has been extremely productive. Can they continue that throughout the rest of the regular season? I know that if I was another team and I was the Titans or the Lions or the Jets that are facing the Vikings. And every team says this, but it's even more true for the Minnesota Vikings. You cannot turn the ball over in our own area of the field, because then it's going to turn into points, and then the Minnesota Vikings defense is just rolling from there. You're setting up and giving Sam Darnold easy, free points. And to the Vikings' credit, they haven't converted these into field goals. They've converted these into touchdowns, which is a massive difference when winning football games. So it's fun to watch when the national media jump on board, but the Vikings still need to continue to pass these regular season tests because they need to be hot at the end of the year as well. And thank you for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button right there. And thank you for making this podcast part of your day.